again, everyone. Welcome to the New York City Housing Authority's board meeting. Good morning, Chair, board members, Chief Operating Officer, staff, members of the public. It's wonderful to see everyone in person again, so welcome. Just a few reminders. I just made the announcement with respect to the microphones, so everyone is aware. I'm just going to remind everyone to please silence all cell phones. If you wish to answer or make a call, please step out to do so. In addition, unless you're at the podium, uh, please be silent for the duration of this meeting. Lastly, I'll make this announcement again at the end, but I believe there's a meeting scheduled to occur immediately following the board meeting. So at the end of the board meeting, please quickly exit, clearing the exits and entrance doors. Thank you so much. Chair, there are no members of the public wishing to provide comments. As such, we will proceed with the regular calendar. The first order of business is a motion to adopt the minutes of the regular meeting held on May 25th, Wednesday, May 25th, 2022. Do I have a motion? Thank you, Vice Chair. Seconded by?
Gavin.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. Thank you so much. I note for the record that Member Austin is absent from this meeting. We will proceed to the Chair's remarks on the Public Housing Preservation Trust. Chair?
So good morning, everyone, and it is good to see everyone. So it's a sign, a good sign. And we have a lot of good news to talk about, and that is the bill that passed in Albany that creates the Public Housing Preservation Trust. And two of the three people responsible for this are here to actually help with the presentation, because without the work of our Albany Musketeers, we would not have had this bill. And I want to pay, for the record, special attribution to Brian Honan, Andrew Kaplan, and Courtney, who supported them. They were in Albany. Were you up there 2 months or 3 months, Mr. Honan? 3 years. So let me tell you, when I went up, what their day is like. They wake in the morning, they go downstairs to coffee, everyone has a little bit of breakfast, and the next thing you know, you're walking the halls, back and forth, changing meetings, making your points. But here's the intensity of the engagements, but their steadiness was just remarkable. They stayed at it. We made revisions to the bill based on feedback that we got from that engagement over these past months. So I really think I wanted them to kind of walk us through a few of the high points, because this board will now be in partnership with a new board someday. And the kinds of things that will come to this board are the redevelopment plans, proposals, and investments that these properties have been starved for. And what's exciting about that is Nycha's not selling anything. We have a lease arrangement with the trust, and the trust board and the Nycha board are going to work in tandem to make these investments happen. We have hard copy material as part of your packets today. If you're interested, the actual bill is here. I can tell you it's not the kind of reading that, but it's intense, and it's really cool in places. It's just so cool. It's just things are in this bill that don't exist anywhere else in the country. No one has done anything quite like this, and no one has ever given a housing authority as much opportunity in partnership with the trust to do the work that we have to do. So I wanted to ask Brian and Andrew to give us a quick walkthrough here. And there's more material, letter to the residents, the FAQs, and our one-pager. Our plan is that over the next month or two, we're going to produce a trust booklet. It's going to look like a little package and we're going to either mail it or hand deliver it to everybody and hang it on the door or whatever, so that there's not a single resident that doesn't get this package of information. And then there's be electronic versions, obviously, but we want to make sure that everyone sees the same thing that we're seeing today. So, Mr. Honan, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I appreciate all the kind words. But one thing I would like to add, although Andrew, Courtney, and myself were up in Albany, really the collaboration and the total team effort on Nycha's part was incredible. From the chair's office to the chief operating office, and I know also that this board had a lot of comments, a lot of thoughts on the legislation, and believing that all trickled down. The law department, the Capitol, I just can go on and on. I've been in Nycha for quite some time now. I've never seen such a collaborative effort and the positive just willingness to get it done and whatever it takes. Also, the collaboration from the city law department was just absolutely phenomenal in their help. Whether it was at 11 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning, they were always willing to advise us and to get us to a really good place. This was an effort that truly, the word innovative is probably used too much, but this is truly an innovative initiative here, and that has a lot of first of its kind, right? This will be the first public-to-public transfer. It's something that we've heard from residents for a very, very long time. They recognize that other programs will get you benefits, and those benefits are great, but not everybody is comfortable with the private side of those benefits. So people said, we want those benefits. Sure, we want to see repairs, but we also want to make sure that we have the protections in place. We want to make sure that our rents and that our resident rights are in place. And this legislation does that. It mentions 964. All the rights, they're not similar. They're exactly the same that are in place in this bill. And that's really, really important. We also wanted to make sure, too, residents tell us that even when Nycha has money, we often don't spend it fast enough, and the quality of the contractors are not up to their standard or anyone else's standard for that matter. And we make sure that we put in this legislation procurement relief that nobody else has in the state. In this bill that will allow us to do projects faster and better. And so once we get these funds, we're going to see quick turnarounds, and we're going to see satisfaction, quicker than in the past. And then lastly, in terms of resident participation, once again, this is the first in the nation. Residents are going to have, for the first time, the ability to choose the future for their communities. It looks like the governor is going to sign the bill tomorrow, which is really exciting and which is really fast for the bill just passed. It seems like a long time ago, but tomorrow will be 2 weeks ago. So the governor will sign tomorrow. That starts a clock, right? So 60 days after enactment, and then 60 days after that, we have to come up with a voting process. And the voting will be done by individual residents, 18 years or older, who are on a lease, and they can vote for what their communities are going to look like in the future. They can vote for the trust. They can vote for another modernization opportunity. Or, in some ways, the most powerful vote that they'll have is the ability to say, at this time, we're going to do nothing, right? Because this is not the first plan to save Nycha. Let's face it, we've all done this before. And oftentimes what residents resent, in the past is the fact that the housing authority comes into the development kind of, with sharp elbows and says, we're going to do this. And nobody really appreciates a plan where they don't have a menu where they only have one option. So the fact that you have people with options and they're going to be able to determine their future is key here. The support that we received from the legislature was tremendous. At the end of the day, if you looked at this bill last year, everyone thought, great idea, never going to happen. And, the fact that we went from there to passing in both houses by a pretty good margin is really remarkable and really does go to all the work that we all did. So really appreciate it. Andrew, I don't know if you have anything to add.
So Brian covered the most important elements of the bill. I think two other things to mention that were amendments for the version of the bill that ended up passing both houses of the legislature. Thank you. In addition to residents having the ability to opt in to the trust, residents will also have the ability to participate in vendor selection, which means they'll be able to work with Nycha and the trust to select the construction vendors who are going to be performing the work. And then third, also be able to participate in quality assurance committees alongside trust employees and Nycha employees to make sure that as the work is being done and once the work is completed, there are checks on quality, there are checks on timelines and deadlines of the vendors and progress as we go along.
I want to add just a couple things. So I also want to give a shout out. We mentioned City Hall, but I want to give a shout out to Chief Housing Officer, because Jessica really stepped up and really helped us. In addition to the law department, we had an advocate who was very, very strong inside a new administration, which was very helpful. And we had support from the governor's office. We had early support from there, encouragement, and we did some thank you calls over the past couple of weeks. And what was interesting to me about those calls is that our team up there, now I want to say, I don't know how often you hear this word used or this phrase. She said, the one person I called who was very familiar with the process says, we had honest brokers. So I think that you should all feel good about that, because the transparency of the exchanges and the quality of the exchanges, even with those who are in opposition to these ideas, really paid off. So I think that's a tribute to the three of you and the support team that kind of encircled and embraced this. We will probably, in the coming months, we're already beginning to define the work groups that we're going to need. If you look at this bill and you just started to make a list of things that have to happen, there's some big things that have to happen. There's things we have to, there's even requirements in the bill as to what has to go in certain documents. So that is all going to be worked on. Our plan is to set up an internal team. We will probably also have some outside expertise come in and out as we need it. And then going to detail people into this team. We'll backfill lines in the departments that they're coming from so we don't lose any staff or capacity. But we're going to focus on driving this over the next couple of years. The other thing I'll just say, and then we can do questions because you probably have a lot. These procurements, first, I find it ironic that I had to wait pretty nearly 50 years to get this procurement relief in a public housing program. There's nothing else like it in the country. There is nothing else like it. It's extraordinary. It gives us an opportunity, and the kind of contractors and contracts we'll be talking about are not simply a roof contract or a boiler plant. We're going to be talking about, $300 or $400 million at a property and bundling those properties into some number of units. These will be big contracts, which we hope can attract big market firms that do construction management and this kind of thing. And we can attract them with the best value model. Because not only will we be able to get their pricing, but with best value, we can actually engage with them and either get price or other options that we can negotiate before we, perhaps with fewer compromises than in a design bid build model. So that is going to be extremely powerful. I also want to call out the fact that this bill was strongly supported by HUD. very unusual for the department. I don't think I've ever seen them send to a state legislature a letter of endorsement for a proposal. So Dominique Blum, who is our primary contact at HUD, Adrian Todman, who's the deputy secretary, and members of the secretary's office themselves, we're very aware of what we're trying to do here, and we're very supportive. So with that, I'll stop, and we have the folks here who got us to this place, and if the board members have questions, we should go ahead and open it up.
Hi, good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank Brian for contacting me and getting me the updated bill, as well as Vilma, Mariela, and the Corporate Secretary's office. I got it and I've read it. Actually, I read it twice. And I still have, because it's strange, for me it's strange reading. So and then I made some phone calls. So besides, I'm sorry. Besides the misinformation that's been, spread out there by other agencies and, grassroots groups, correct me if I'm wrong, in the trust, whatever monies come to the trust, those monies cannot be spent on anything else but what it's been put in the trust for. Is that correct? Okay. Now, there's another question that a lot of people have been asking as well. So, when you say you have the option of either opting out or whatever choices you have, when I read it, I saw that the only options you have is the trust, RAD, or PAC. So, what happens to Section 9?
So the trust doesn't, the legislation doesn't say RAD or PACT, it says a modernization strategy, and that was done on purpose, right? So if, residents from another development say, we have a plan that doesn't involve RAD and PACT, say they wanted to, build buildings, or they want, whatever it is, I don't know, I'm not gonna make that decision for them, but they have another strategy in order to raise funds for improvements to the development, that should be an option. So, so it doesn't dictate it has to be RAD or it has to be PACT. And the other thing is the do nothing option. The do nothing option is essentially not do nothing. It is to stay in section 9. And some folks told us that, well, it's not passive because we're going to stay in section 9. We're going to continue the fight for funding in Washington. And if that is what the community decides, we should respect it. We should also know, though, that it is not a forever vote, too. So if you decided, you do not want to do anything at this time, for whatever reason, later on, after you've seen success, you can come back to Nycha and say, we've looked at this program, it works really well, we've considered other options, we would like to take another vote.
And then the final question that I have is, there's mention of default, okay? So, I'm playing devil's advocate, okay? Let's say the trust defaults. Let's say Nycha defaults. What happens to all those units that now invested in these, this new idea that we're using these days to try and preserve whatever public housing we have left? What happens to those units now?
So I think this is really unfortunate, this argument, because I think it's really meant to scare people, right? Because words like default, words like foreclosure, words like property seizure are very scary, especially, to those of us who remember, not so long ago we went through the housing crisis, right? But what we're asking for here is not an unusual way for government to raise money. Government issues bonds and raises money, and that's how things are built. Government doesn't save money and build a school. They issue bonds and they build a school. You don't hear of government losing schools or losing a train station or losing a bridge, right? These things are all factored into before the deals are made. These payments are factored in. But because it was a concern, it was a real concern, we put language into the legislation that, number one, the city has the right to cure if there ever was a default. And yes, it's right, it doesn't say obligation, but it essentially puts a moral and political obligation on the city to, all eyes would be on the city to make this right. If the city says no, if they're not not in the financial position to do that, then the state has the right to cure after that. So that is both, a political and moral obligation on both of both of those, entities to step in. And then to your point, the land and the units and the housing are not being put up as collateral in any of these deals. There is no way, no world that these properties could be lost or could be operated as anything other than housing for low and very low income people. So, nightmare scenario, one of these properties defaults. The folks who live there now would still continue to live there with their current rents and rights, and the folks who live in the future would also be there. Same, same income, same rights, same rents.
Okay, so that kind of clears it up for me, I just wanted to be sure, because if you recall, not so long ago, when the federal government stopped handing out vouchers and stuff like that, people with those vouchers were now going stir crazy in the streets, screaming at the top of their lungs, where am I gonna go?
Right, right.
And, that's just still a scary thought in many of our residents' mind. So that's why I asked the part of the default, in keeping that in mind as well.
So I think the question is really a valid one, and I think I'm glad it came up, and I'm glad it was part of the conversation, but it has been answered so many times now, and I think folks who continue to keep it out there as a scare tactic, and it's unfortunate because it is causing anxiety.
It's like that guy that didn't lose the election.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Ms. Towns.
Good morning. So, from what I've read, is it actual that this is investment by private entities that are lining up to be involved in this trust? Is that true?
So,
Is it?
Andrew.
So it's through bonds, which anyone can purchase on the bond market. So it would be investment issued by the trust, or it could be through HDC, the Housing Development Corporation, and then it could be purchased. The bonds themselves could be purchased by private entities. They could be purchased by pension funds. It could be by a range of folks.
But this is an investment. This is not, those who are lined up to do the investing are not humanitarian organizations. This is business.
Yeah,
Let me finish.
but, yeah, Joe, that's true.
Okay,
True.
you cut me off, hold on. So, they're looking to make some sort of profit. They're not looking to come actually save us, but there is opportunity for us to have better living conditions, yes, and for them to make money. And sometimes structurally in their organizations, things change. If I'm one of these investors and I die and my family says, we don't want to do this anymore. As Brian just explained, things would go back to the nightmare scenario, that people wouldn't be displaced or whatever, but everything would just stop. See, we're investing, we're looking to make money. It's not the Lone Ranger and Tonto. We're not trying to be saved. People are going to make money, and things could possibly change that would stop everything. The second part, this is a massive undertaking to do tutorials to teach the residents how to read this material, how to absorb it, the misinformation, the wrong things being spread around. This is going to take a while, so people can make and be involved in the process. That alone is going to take much, much money and time and personnel. And the last part is I attended a trust meeting at the New York Library 25 years ago. From what I was told, if property goes into a trust, this is private property that people own, the library keeps it, and they give it back to the family at some point in time, but no tax hits, no inheritance fees, so the family can keep it. I know this is a whole entirely different situation, and as far as HUD being on board with this, I had a conversation with somebody that used to work for HUD, and they said, well, Nycha's an entity they care about, but they're seen as a body with an appendage that needs to be fixed. And this gives the opportunity for HUD to have that arm removed and fixed, be put back on the body of work that HUD, or to be put back so it'd be a better body part. And I'm just saying, it's just so many moving parts to this, the things, human nature, people working, and decisions. I'm trying to find out the three questions I asked, and that's about it for that right now.
So let me go through them. I'll work in reverse a little bit. This is not a trust like a trust where someone puts money aside for their children or for their
I
future.
understand,
Yeah. We used this word because we thought it better conveyed the purpose of the new partner. Now, in the transactions that the trust would handle, we would work likely with HDC. We would have a bundle of properties, substantially sized number of units. We would size the debt service based on the additional income that we receive using the voucher program. And then, based on that and other factors, we would do a bond issue. Now, a bond issue comes with a prospectus. It comes with the risks clearly stated so that if someone wants to invest in those bonds. But the bond holder is making their money on the interest. They're getting interest. It's almost as if you set up an opportunity for another type of savings account and you're going to earn interest steady for 20 years so the bonds are retired. As an investor, there would be transaction requirements in your obligations when you buy the bonds if you wanted to sell the bonds. And the entity that issued the bonds can buy them back. It might permit a transfer to another entity. So the scenario where an original investor might say, well, I don't want to do this anymore, is actually covered in the transactional language in the prospectus for the bond. So they have to abide by those rules if they want to sell or transfer or do anything like that. And the types of folks who buy these things range from private companies to public pension funds, insurance companies, large, even health companies that are in the health side often do this. So these are kind of a revenue bond, in a manner of speaking. And the kinds of things that have been put forward about this process and the collapse of it, I think to Brian's point, are extremely rare. And I think that this is actually a very safe investment for someone. Because in addition to the debt service sizing, we've changed the fundamental operation of the property for the better. If I'm investing in this, it's my hope all the construction gets done and the property is now operating with a whole different maintenance profile, which means money that we used to spend sending out heating plant technicians at some midnight hour, we're not going to have to spend that anymore. That money can stay in the property to do other things. In addition, the transactions will require, at the property level, certain reserve accounts. So once the property is rehabilitated, there'll be certain reserves attached to that property budget for minor capital items that come up between big rehab. And the last thing is, at the end of 20 years when the bonds are paid off and we need to do more capital work, we can refinance in the same manner using the trust. The advantage of that is that we would never be in this deep a hole again. You know, that we're not going to be 40 years behind or 50 years behind. So in the bond issuing process itself, and what we'll do, I think when we get closer to a financing period, we can have HDC come to our board meeting here and talk about how they issue bonds and what kind of things are in those perspectives and what kind of controls. These deals are regulated. You know, they're not, bondholders expect an annual return on their investment, and that's where they're looking to make their money.
I
Just add
see your response. I just want to simplify it a little bit. Say if me and Victor were partners in these bonds and investing in this.
Right.
We have a fist fight. No, I'm trying to keep.
No, go ahead, Joe, go ahead.
Fist fight, and Victor said that, well, the hell with you, I don't want to do this. And I said, well, I don't want to do it either. And we invested in Amsterdam houses, as an example. What happens at Amsterdam houses if me and Victor step away from the investment?
I don't think anything will happen. What you have to decide is the bond issuer, in this case maybe HDC, you have to say, I want to sell or transfer my holdings. And they'll say, okay, let's go back to the agreement you signed when you bought the bonds, which controls how you can do that. So you don't just get to walk away. There are consequences when you make the investment. And the deal is that there are certain ways you can transfer or sell bonds or their value in midterm, but those will be spelled out, and there's likely for possibly even penalties for that, but you will have to follow those rules in order for that kind of thing to occur, so that in the end, the investment in Amsterdam houses is secure. Your transaction financially for the bonds, that's going to be governed sort of up here.
And Ms. Adams, if I could add, the original properties that, Nycha manages over 300 properties now, they were all built originally with bond money, at least most of them were. In fact, in 2010, board member Gonzalez will remember this, that when we federalized the 21 city and state developments, they still had debt on them. And if you asked your average resident, or even asked most people in Nycha, if they knew that, they weren't aware. But before we were able to federalize those properties, we had to make sure that that all that debt was paid, and it was. And we were able to move forward and federalize these properties. So, again, this is not an unusual way to raise money. It's commonplace, and it is how the program started originally, and we're going back to it in some ways.
Okay.
Can I?
Any other questions, Joe? Or Emma? Okay, Emma.
I just have a, sorry. It's great to see you guys in person, and I just, having spent time in the trenches with you in previous lives, I know how hard you've worked, and it's just so wonderful. Having spent a lot of time in Albany, too, you don't get to see this happen very often, and it's really, I hope you feel so proud. I'm in higher ed now, and I was just thinking you should come teach a course about what you just did, but it would be so difficult to understand. I'm taking it back. Maybe for grad students or something, PhDs. But anyway, I tip my hat. I just wanted to put a punctuation point on the work that's going to be involved in voting, and I know that you guys have already started thinking about this. I would very much like to stay close if possible and contribute in any way to constructing what residents can feel is a fair election process. And I just think that all of the potential pitfalls, first, whatever the engagement is on day one will really matter. The scrutiny will be so immense, and I know you guys know this, but I just want to say it like that. The first rollout will be what the press and what a lot of people feel, okay, this is working, or nope, it's a sham. And so constructing an election process that people feel it has, 100% integrity and feel it's got more integrity than any other election process, bluntly, in the city and state, and that the Nycha Board of Elections is not the City Board of Elections, I think is really, really important. And I also think establishing a very strong apparatus that will prevent moneyed interests from influencing elections, especially those that may have interests in the end product, will be really important for residents to have faith in. But otherwise, again, just tremendous.
Thank you, because we do agree, and our very early thinking and I want to stress that, is we're really dealing with three pieces around the election. Now, this actually has to be put into rulemaking. So we have a proposed set of rules that have to be published after a certain period once the bill is signed, and we're going to engage stakeholders and residents and others in that development of those drafts.
Right.
But if we wanted to think about it sort of in a larger scale, we have the initial engagement where we kind of are at the property either for a meeting or a series of meetings about what the choices are. So here's how the trust works. If you like RAD and you know, because I've had some resident leaders say, I don't want Nycha to manage. And I said, well, RAD is not a Nycha managed. You know, RAD is private. And others say, I only want Nycha. So now that's one of the sort of fundamentals in the two that you can get to think about. And then you have the third option, which is I'm going to wait. There's an introduction piece. Then there's a piece where, I don't know how to describe it, where there's the debate or the discussion and who's going to help the residents technically or provide advice and how is that controlled. And then there's the actual election itself that has to be proctored. And we're thinking that Nycha is not the proctor, that we hire someone to proctor these elections who's got some high level of integrity, who is sort of independent from us and would be there maybe even earlier, you know, to introduce themselves and be part of that engagement process so that the residents can see everyone who's on site. So, you know, who that entity is, we'll have to figure that out. But if you thought about the rules, it would probably include those kinds of steps. We need a minimum number of participation, things like that. So, and even that intermediate step, like let's have this debate and discussion. One of the things we took away from the Fulton Working Group was the power of having some technical assistance provided to residents. That's not Nycha. So, and to Joe's point about trying to make this understandable, that would be part of the thing. Like if you're at a meeting after the initial introduction, you know, well, what am I going to, you know, what's our relationship with Nycha after the property goes to trust, or what's our relationship with Nycha if it goes RAD? Those are all things that we could make sure that third-party technical assistance provides. But I think we're going to have choices. Personally, my biggest concern is locking down that election process so that the day of election or the vote, whether it, you know, do you allow for remote voting, you know, because some seniors are not able-bodied in a way, they can't get around. How do we do, you know, who's counting? And all the things that we ask, you know, I think we'd like to get a very strong third party in some capacity to do that, have a validation, and then that's presented to us. I don't, you know, almost like what they do when they announce the Academy Awards. Price Waterhouse has, you know, totaled up all the ballots, and this is a true and accurate count. Here's the envelope. And so we have a chance to, I think, build that, and we're going to invest in that. You know, there's a number of investments the authority will have to make. They'll come to this board and say, okay, what's the initial capitalization for the trust once it's established? What part of that capitalization is going to go for elections? Is Nycha going to put any money in once, you know, there's money on the trust side now? You know, obviously we put it there, but so those kinds of transactions and discussions will be the kinds of things we'll see in future board meetings. Plus, once the rule is issued in draft, we'll have a board meeting where we go over that rule so that, you know, there's a public, as our representatives, you know, and commissioners, you get to see what's in the draft rules and understand it, because you'll be asked, and I know you'll be asked, hey, what does this mean? And, you know, so that's kind of the thing that we're thinking, and that's part of what the working groups that we're starting to form will do, and there'll be one on the election rules, and we can tap into board members who are interested in that or helping us vet those things, because I do think that's going to be the hardest process out of the gate, and we're going to be very careful with it. Yes, sir.
Unrelated to what this your innovation team with the weekend cleaning seems to be off to a good start. I got very good feedback from 3 developments.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, I tell you, if it works, I'm gonna tell you. If it doesn't work.
No, no, I appreciate it.
Okay, so, and in our case, I came out into the hall on the weekend, and I thought I was gonna need ice skates. I mean, it was like beautiful, and I said, okay, and then the other lady called me from her development on the east side, and somebody else was talking to me, and it seemed to be off to a really good start.
Good, good, good.
I don't know who the innovation team is. There's no name on the paper that you sent. Is this a secret organization or something? I'm just.
There are a couple of them in the room. It's a combination of the strategy folks plus the operating folks.
And as to your example about the Academy Awards, you know they did call the wrong picture 2 years ago. Okay, that's
Yeah.
it. I'm done.
That was the fault of the presenter, not the, yeah. Yes, Paul.
Thank you. I have 2 quick questions and then a statement. The first is, I'm really excited about the idea of a resident hard copy piece. I think we should do some town halls, or have you considered doing some town halls with that piece, even before the 120 days? In other words, the 120 days to design the election process, it's going to seem like forever to people versus this time. And I think it's like building the trust in the trust. I mean, and starting with some town halls.
Yeah, so, look, if we spiked the football 2 weeks ago, then I think we've done like half a quarter of the job. Like, the real work starts like tomorrow. And to your point, we've already been talking about doing weekly town halls by Zoom. So this way, and we're going to do both for residents and for employees to make sure that everybody feels comfortable, because when you're just reading about this in the media or in conversations that you are having with folks in the lobby, it can be overwhelming, and to have the opportunity to ask questions and get your questions answered is really important. So the town halls will not be very presentation heavy. They'll be light on presentation, heavy on, questions.
Great. And it's all about building trust. I mean, and I use that
Exactly.
term kind of as the double meaning. I mean, it's about building trust. The second question is it reasonable, and this is probably for the chair, that the trust board will be appointed by the end of this year?
So we'd like to. We don't have a formal goal yet. The work team is going to develop a master schedule. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd like to have the board, we got to incorporate the trust, we got to get the board established. That means the appointment process. If it goes well, it's conceivable. You could have the members done by the end of this year. I don't think that's impossible. And it's even possible we might have an inaugural meeting. So those would certainly be worthy goals. I think once we have the schedule for the trust, we'll come back to the Nycha board and lay out for you what we think the timing is. It is possible we could have a board meeting this year, but I want to see that full schedule before I would tell you that we can
Great.
to that.
Thank you for those 2 questions. My statement is that I, too, want to echo the incredible job that's been done by the team at Nycha, and the talent that is in this room and behind you is just superb. But I'd also like to give a shout-out to the chair. I mean, this is the time that you should feel also that you stood up for something that you thought would be the salvation, the opportunity, the solution, all of those things. So the whole team deserves the props because you did the real work. But I want to really compliment you.
No, thank you.
I'd like to lead a round of applause for all of you.
I appreciate that, and I think, I don't know, so July will be 50 years for me doing this work. And of course, when you go to your first job, you don't have a clue that you're even going to be working that long. But the thing about this program is, and we heard a little bit of this yesterday at the city housing plan, but I think it's true. And we heard about it on our offsite as well. So when you have your basic needs in a good place, and for us that means apartments, that when you go home at night, you do not have to worry about your ceiling falling. You do not have to worry about the leak in the bathroom. You do not have to worry about heat in the winter. It frees you as an individual and a family to achieve other potential. So if we can invest in our part of the basic needs bargain, which is high-quality shelter, and this is another thing. Over the time being in this business, I have watched housing authorities put the cheapest crap in these units and last less than a couple years. We cannot build that way again. In a way, we have to kind of build the way the structure of these buildings were built, with, concrete and rebar and brick and mortar and all the rest of that. So we need some high-quality material investment. So when you go into your unit, you're not worried about your cabinet handle falling off. You can actually open the window even if you're a senior, because all that is, this is about what it means to sort of allow that family to make a home. And that's a part of our job underneath it. And, economic issues can befall any of us. And as a kid, my father lost his job in the steel mill. The 2 years after that, I recall very vividly, because it was precarious. And if you live in Nycha housing and you're even looking for work or don't have work, see, the capital at this scale not only gives us a chance to do the building, it gives the families a different chance too. Because with that capital is going to come support for them that didn't exist, and options for them that they can't do now, and a path that just looks completely different. If you go back and look at the Nycha pictures when these properties were brand new, these were beautiful places, beautiful. And that's what we have to get back to. So thank you for your comments, but this is actually a glorious opportunity. And I think we have the group here in this agency to touch all the things in the bill that we need to touch. And the other thing is the staff knows, if we get something out there and it's not working, we're not going to live with it. We're going to change it so we can work it. So, but I also appreciate the board and the support you have given us. And both the hard questions that you apply, because that's part of your job, and that support as well. So we can change the course, and that's a good thing. So thank you.
Since we're going along those lines, I would like to mention someone as well, Jonathan Gouveia. I bother him like crazy. But I got to tell you that the new movement that's going on and how they've progressed from the very first transformation, it's going a lot smoother. Things are going in the right place. More residents are buying into it. But I got to tell you, I wouldn't want to be in his seat because of all the different, and I call him on a constant basis with making sure that the corporate offices of these management companies that we have, taking care of our developments, are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And he's making sure that that happens. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, in the process of you getting the residents, as Board Member Gavin stated, you're really going to have to get something that it can relate to in writing, audio, visually, that they can see and relate to. You might want to team up with the Reeves people, because they deal with a lot of engagement with residents who are on the lower end trying to make better lives for themselves and things of that nature. You really have to make people comfortable with what they're reading and what they're looking at, because that's where the confusion and misinterpretation comes.
Yep, no, I couldn't agree more. I think this is hard stuff. I mean, I think we're really going in, we're doing something for the first time. So anytime you do that, it takes a lot of courage. We also, too, we're dealing with let's face it, an organization that's, been around for a long time and, in the past hasn't always kept its promises. And so it's a new day, but, we're dealing with a trust with a capital T and a trust with a lowercase t. And in some ways, the lowercase t is just as important, if not more important, than the organization. So we've got to build that up. And you're right, doing it in many different ways especially the ways that resonates for people, whether, some people may want the full text of the bill and some people may want a one-pager that summarizes everything, and also hearing from different audiences. That's why building like a big tent partnership is like so important for us too. And I also too really need to mention this too, though. We, as a city, did a really good job, either from the city of New York to the Housing Authority, but we also had tremendous partners from labor and from advocates and from many, many residents who came up to Albany and appeared at rallies down here in the city and wrote letters and, really got involved. And that's the type of partnership that we want, because you may not believe me, Brian Honan, as an HR employee, but you may believe a tenant association president or just a tenant who has learned more about this. And, and so neighbor talking to neighbor is really important.
Well, I think you're selling yourself short, because in our association, when you were helping me out with problems a while back with heat, your email showed compassion, concern. When I read them, I felt like somebody was definitely coming to help me. So something on this scale, you have to have someone in place for other residents that are coming in with fear and anxiety and displacement that they can relate to and talk to. But as I said, I didn't even meet you for a while until much later. But reading what you were saying resonated that, okay, someone is here that's going to try to help. You see what I'm trying to tell you?
Yep.
So you're selling yourself a little shorter, but you can, maybe you can clone yourself. I don't know what can be done, but I'm sure that's the point I'm trying to drive home. You have to sell this to the people, and so they can digest it with something they can relate to. And
I
that's
appreciate
it.
that.
All right.
And now, also, one of the better things having go up to Albany, I get to see your daughter a few times, and
Oh, boy.
she says,
Oh, I know.
And Joe, I think you're going to make a good point, because there's a couple folks I volunteer for a podcast on the trust where you could just listen to it. We could have it in different languages, for example, short YouTubes and things like that people can access in different ways, so that I've asked Brian and Andrew if they want to star in any of these, but they've declined. But we could actually put some real resonance on this, so that you could have to your point about having a conversation with some of this stuff, where I haven't shared this with any of the staff, so they're all like, "What the hell is he talking about?" So it's here's two residents, camera zooms in, they're sitting on the bench, and they're talking about the trust. And you could have that conversation in 4 or 5 different languages, but the conversation is in the place where they are, as opposed to some of I know we have the legal terms and stuff. But there's all kinds of ways to approach it, because I do think your sensitivity to this issue is accurate. The communication is going to have to be multi-way.
Get a celebrity or somebody. Will Smith is not going to be busy for a while, so.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation and discussion on this very important issue. And thanks again for everyone who was involved in making it happen. We'll move along to the next item on the agenda, and there are 2 reports. The first of which is a change program overview of the Asset and Capital Management Division, and it's being presented by Sean Mavani, Chief Asset and Capital Management Officer. Sean?
Good morning, board members. As Jackie mentioned, my name is Sean Mavani. I'm Chief Asset and Capital Management Officer since earlier in this year. I oversee our Asset and Capital Management Division, which we've integrated a few months back. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the change program that we're implementing there, and a couple components of that, a few highlights, and then I think we have a second presentation that's going to deep dive into our Sandy work as well, that I oversee today. So the motivation for putting in place an Asset and Capital Management Division, which integrates 4 of our areas. It integrates our capital work, it integrates our Sandy, or recovery and resiliency work, our real estate work, and our comprehensive modernization program that we put in place last year, and I'll talk a little bit more about as we move forward, really comes out of the transformation plan. The transformation plan lays out 3 goals for creating this division and a number of outcomes. And you can see those on the slide. But the overall kind of first goal is to just integrate and align these areas so that we are able to think more strategically and have a single kind of pipeline of modernization projects across Nycha properties. And so we're doing a lot of work, obviously, in that space to bring together the work in these areas and the approaches we use. And you've heard a little bit more about that this morning with this new element of the trust. The second transformation goal in the plan is to really strengthen our partnership with residents and stakeholders, our accountability to the properties, our ability to use data in the way we manage planning as well as delivery of projects, and more broadly, just to be more effective at our project delivery, whether that is capital work or that is our PAC program or other types of projects that we're running out of the division. And obviously, the goal of all of that is to bring the best, comprehensive repairs as we can to the properties as quickly as possible. And the third goal is really to bring innovation in our building materials, in our construction methods, in the technologies we use, in our energy efficiency and sustainability in those areas, really to both enhance residents' living experience, as was discussed earlier, but also to make the buildings perform better, to make our job of building management easier as we move forward. So that's kind of what we took as the guiding direction of the effort to develop a change program for the division. And the change program really has 2 components, and I'm going to talk about each for just a moment. One is kind of reorganizing around these goals and objectives, and one is a set of strategic initiatives or a strategic plan for the next 12 months of how do we really drive and make this change stick in the way that we work day to day within the division and the way we work with partners, whether that's within Nycha or outside of Nycha. So the next page shows kind of the top line of our organizational structure that's been implemented as part of our change program. So we brought together the areas I mentioned. So you see real estate development, Jonathan's team, comprehensive modernization program. And this is something I don't think we've discussed before, but this is a program that we put in place about 9 months ago. Out of the City Capital Action Plan that came out of the HUD agreement and was finalized early last year, we do have 2 large allocations of funding for 2 properties. So we have about $350 million at St. Nicholas Houses in Harlem, and we have about $150 million at Toad Hill Houses in Staten Island. So these are kind of our first large kind of holistic renovations of properties. And that program has been developing. We've been learning a lot around the vendor community, around the resident engagement approach, and around how we can do the procurements and the construction. We'll be going out with our design build RFQs for both those sites later this month. And we're hoping that a lot of these learnings will be beneficial for the trust model and the way that we renovate our properties through these type of large capital projects, working with the vendor community, with residents, with other stakeholders. The third box you see is our capital programs department. What we've done here is we've brought together our recovery and resiliency team and the broader portfolio of component capital work that we do. Joyce Inderbrand, who's going to be presenting on Sandy, is leading that department now, bringing all those learnings from the Sandy program into the broader portfolio of capital projects that we're taking on. We have a sustainability vertical or department that's going to continue to drive a lot of our innovation, whether that's areas like waste management or heating systems or energy efficiency. And then we have 3 business functions that work closely with those other areas, our architecture and engineering services team. This is what we've traditionally called our design team. They work both within the division and across Nycha to provide different type of technical services. They also oversee the architecture and engineering consultants who do a lot of the work on our capital projects. We have a strategic services department. What we're trying to do here, and this is really where we're trying to drive some of the improvements in the division from, is to build out a number of teams around project management excellence, project controls, procurement excellence, or vendor and contract management improvements, business intelligence and information to run such a large capital portfolio. So we're investing in some of those kind of back office operational excellence type of functions to really help all of our teams to operate better and more effectively moving forward. And then we have our quality assurance department. So these are really critical teams that work on things like construction safety, quality, our engineering audit function that the city requires around our city funding, and a number of other compliance-related activities. So that's our organization. Obviously, there is a detailed organizational chart below this, And we've done a good amount of reorganization of staff, really looking at the functions that were resource stretched and needed more staffing, and some of the areas that were more resource rich we could take from, to kind of very efficiently reorganize the division. And that was implemented. Most of that has been completed by now, and we're moving forward on that basis. So that's the organizational side. We just move to the next slide. We've also developed a kind of strategic change program with 35 critical initiatives. This was a process we went through over several months, led by senior staff internally, but working with partners across the organization, in some cases with external partners as well, to really understand what are the priority things we need to do to continue to improve and deliver at the scale that we're working today as a real estate and capital function. There's a lot of detail around this, but I just want to highlight a few of those initiatives that came out and that we're really focused on in the next 12 months to implement. In this page, you can kind of see a table, shows you the 4 areas that we focused on around alignment of portfolio planning, scoping, and our design standards. So, as Greg mentioned, we want to make sure we use good materials in all of our development work, and that extends across the PAC partners we work with or the capital projects that we implement ourselves, right? So how do we standardize and bring those standards to the right place, beyond where they are today? A second area was around how we really strengthen our engagement with residents and stakeholders and our project management capabilities, our risk management around project delivery. The third area is really about being a good partner with the operations function, our property management, with the range of other teams that we work very closely with within Nycha, procurement, law, and others, but also with other external stakeholders, and with many of the partner agencies that we collaborate with and we're dependent on to deliver effectively. And the fourth area was around general organizational effectiveness, enhancements, and strengthening of some of our internal shared services. So if we move to the next page, you'll get a sense of what kind of things are we doing out of this change program. And I'll just highlight a few here. So the first initiative that's listed on this page 1.1 is around building out a more transparent and strategic prioritization model and process for where we make our capital investments. We do obviously have prioritization methodologies we use. Bringing the different teams together in one division allows us to do that more strategically, to bring in the organization's strategy and bring in resident input more heavily than we have in the past. So that's one of our main initiatives. There's some icons on the right. You can see a legend on the bottom, but this initiative will involve stakeholder engagement. It will involve some new process and standards. It will involve some actual process and systems improvements and aspects like that. And each of the initiatives typically obviously involves a number of different elements to really implement and make sure it has traction as we move forward. So highlighting a few of the other initiatives, 2.1 is around our internal management processes of being more data-driven, tracking and managing against specific KPIs around how we work and strengthening our external reporting as well. I'll highlight what's listed as 2.2. We've had challenges with our capital work in the past. Part of that has been substantive around how we manage those. Part of that has been much more around communication. We've never really had a dedicated outreach function that has both the capital projects understanding and enough bandwidth to go out and engage with residents and stakeholders on a regular basis. We've had that for select programs. For example, for Sandy, we have outreach resources, or obviously in the PAC program, we have extensive resources. And this is just an effort to really strengthen our ability to do outreach around capital projects, to provide good materials to residents to make sure their questions are answered, but also to coordinate with our property management function more closely on capital work. And there's a range of other initiatives on here, including those that relate to our project delivery, those that relate to our internal people management. So I hope that gives you a feel of the kind of things that we're trying to deliver to transform the division as well. So the last thing I want to do is just highlight a little bit more about our capital projects portfolio in particular. You've heard more around our real estate work because of the review of the deal documents and approvals on the board, but I don't think you've seen as much around what we've been doing in the capital space in kind of like a succinct, data-driven way. So we've pulled just 2 pages from a recent report to give you a sense of what our performance looks like. The first page, if you can move to the next slide, is more of a financial view about the money that's been coming into Nycha and the money that we've been expending each year within our from our capital funds, right? And you see there's kind of 3 bars on each of the years here. The green bar is how much new funding becomes available to us from federal, city, and state sources. This does exclude our Sandy work, which kind of skews the picture, and we'll show that later in the Sandy deep dive. But you can see over the years we are getting more money in. We had a peak year in 2019, just before COVID, with new city allocations. The dark blue bar is how much we're obligating or contracting each year. And that has been growing as well. There was a bit of a dip in 2020 with COVID, but we picked that back up. So in 2021, we've contracted or obligated in a single year more than we've ever done, so $972 million out of the capital funds. And then our expenditure is the light blue, and that has been consistently growing. Again, in 2021, we spent over $900 million, excluding the Sandy portfolio, which will add another $300 to $400 million on top of that. So we have been moving projects forward. We have the largest portfolio we've ever had, and you'll see a bit more about that in the next page. But our financial trends, have been moving as we get money in. It does take us a couple years to get that out the door and start spending because of the design and procurement process. That's in the first few years of a project, but this is the kind of trend that we want to see and keep moving in the future. So the last page I have is, instead of a financial view, just a view on the type of projects we're doing. And we've just pulled out 2021. This is the largest number of active projects we've ever had. We had 691 active construction projects in some phase of their life cycle. So anywhere from the procurement piece to kind of closing off construction in 2021. And you can see the distribution of those across different types of scope areas. So at the bottom of that first column, you see heating, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing was our largest category. Building envelope, safety and security, and so on, moving up. And we also completed 140 projects last year. Now, these are typically 3 to 4 year projects. So they didn't start in the same year, but they started earlier. And that's, again, the most that we've completed in a year to date. But you can see the areas they've completed on the right. From a financial perspective, that 691 projects correlates to just under $7 billion of project budget that we are working on, in a given year. And similarly, the 140 projects that we closed is almost $750 million that we closed last year. This year's view is slightly smaller. 2021 had a very peak load because of COVID and things slowing down for a year or so. So, we've come back around to about 600 projects that we're running right now actively. But this just gives you a sense of the scale of what we're running at. But also, this is a very novel situation, I think, nationally, to run this many capital projects in one agency. And the kind of transformation and change that we need to do to be very effective at that. So I'll stop there. Oh, sorry. Actually, there's one more page. We wanted to highlight one of the most recent initiatives that we've gotten very positive feedback on the last few months. In April, we launched a public-facing capital projects tracker. I think we've demoed this at council hearings and other places. This gives up-to-date information on about 500 projects that we have active at a time. And stakeholders are utilizing this to go in and to look at individual project details, status, schedules, get contact information, but also to look at more of a portfolio level. Council member offices, for example, will look at a council district and understand their project progress. It's a resource for you all as well, if there's a specific project or development you're interested in to go into. And we will be continuing to enhance this over the next year with new functionality, new features as we get feedback from users. So let me stop there, and I think if there's any questions, to field those. Board Member Adams.
Yeah, it was mentioned twice this morning about the scrutiny of items used in pack and ride, and I had concurred a while ago that this particular company doing building bath fitters was using things, shells for the walls, for the tub. So this day, he just happened to leave the stuff on the sidewalk. And another guy, I bought him a cup of coffee and a bagel, and we had a conversation. So what he said was, I said, this stuff doesn't look too good. He said, well, it makes the apartment a little better. And I said, I agree with you. What he said was that if the residents damage it, if it's determined the residents incurred the damage from them, it's not replaced by bath fitters. That's what he said. And like I said, with just shells, it was goes over the tub, like you see on TV, and over the thing. And he said, and I said, well, this can't hold up in public housing with kids, everyday usage. He said, yeah, he said, but he said it's insured though. I forgot the guidelines for them to replace it on their behalf. But he did say that the residents, if it's shown that the residents damaged it or whatever, and vandalism, whatever, that it's on the agency to take care of that. But the stuff they were using was very flimsy, and that's putting it mildly.
That's helpful, Mr. Adams, sorry.
And then the Sandy thing, Steve sent me the verbal part, but he also sent a 3D imaging of what you're saying and how it works, where it was with the work with the walls going up. It was very nice, you know, and it kind of put a picture from a cognitive standpoint of what was written and what was written, and you could actually see where it was at, what was completed, and how it's done. That was kind of nice. I'm just mentioning it, you know. That's it.
Sure. So just to briefly respond, I mean, we'll definitely take both points of feedback away. In the PAC program, when we do a transaction there, we do specify a range of requirements around both the scope of work as well as performance requirements around materials, durability, quality. And we have strengthened those over the years as we've gone through. One of our change initiatives that I didn't mention that was on the page is to more strongly align those requirements around quality, durability between our own capital work that we do, the PAC program, and in the context of comprehensive modernization that we're also designing and procuring for the first time right in the next few months. So I believe that, you know, through that effort, if there are any existing gaps in durability requirements or quality requirements, we'll be able to close those and have a consistent set of standards that ensures that we get, you know, the right quality at the properties as the chair highlighted earlier. Board Member Gavin.
Thank you very much. It was great. I was curious if you have benchmarked this type of organization outside Nycha or outside public housing.
Yes. So that's a great question, and I didn't talk a lot about the process to get there, but we did a range of different types of benchmarking. Late last year, we did calls with all the other key city agencies with large capital programs to understand a range of issues from how they're organized, how they manage projects, including what software they use, how they assign projects, their staffing levels, and that all went into the process of determining both how we should be structured as well as our kind of appropriate levels of resourcing and where we had gaps and things like that. So we've looked at that. We also engaged with subject matter experts who do the same things on the private sector side. So for real estate, we talked to asset managers and understood how they organize the functions they have, where we might have gaps, et cetera. And similarly on the private sector side. And we, in fact, had some of our contractors who work globally with many different capital programs as part of our working groups to inform, you know, how we're organized and how we do our work moving forward. We tried to leverage as much experience we have externally around that.
Thank you, and it is great to see everybody here in person. Before I was Senior Vice President, I spent the last 6.5 years as the Vice President for the Recovery and Resilience Department, which was founded in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy to really address the critical needs that stemmed from that disaster. And I wanted to just start off with a very short summary of what that program is for those of you who might not have been here when it started. I wasn't. I joined in August of 2016. The Recovery and Resilience Program focused on the 35 developments that were most severely damaged by Superstorm Sandy and really moved to aggressively get as much funding as possible to restore those developments and provide the resilience measure needed to prevent disasters like that from happening in the future. The funding for the R&R program is from several FEMA grant programs. The largest is the 428 program, but there's also others that are funding it. HUD's CDBG disaster recovery program and insurance funding. The project sizes range from $7 million of investment to $550 million of investment. So it's a very, very broad program. Next slide, please. So starting off with the good news, which is since Nycha got access to the majority of that funding in December of 2015, every major contract has been awarded. The program did not pause during COVID. The funding was already obligated, and the federal funding was not impacted by the city pauses. And so you'll see that the program continued to have a lot of activity during COVID. We certainly had to adapt our construction means and methods with people quarantining at home. We eliminated utility outages for a while, and we certainly had other impacts, like the industry did in general, from labor and materials, but we kept the program moving because it was so critical. By the end of 2021, 75% of the funds were invested, and I can say that Nycha is considered across the resilience industry to be a leader in what's called residential retrofit. There's lots of people who design fancy new buildings that have resilience built into them, partially because code requires it. But when it comes to cities like New York with 520 miles of coastline that are essentially already built, what we care about is how do we preserve buildings? And for Nycha, how do we preserve every unit of public housing possible? And so this has been where Nycha's become a leader, and people look to Nycha for how to do that kind of work. I just want to contrast a little bit with the way Nycha typically does capital projects. And this has been almost the first mini step toward comprehensive modernization. Typically, a project might be a single trade or a single component, replacing roofs, replacing gas risers, putting in a new heat and hot water system. For the Sandy program, with investments that were maybe hundreds of millions of dollars at a single development, what we tried to do is bundle together contracts as much as possible. And this efficiency would allow us to have a single general contractor and a single construction manager at a particular development. That creates efficiencies for not just doing the work, but for coordination with property management and stakeholders to be able to get that work done and be able to explain it as well as possible. Next slide, please. It's a little hard to skim this slide, but you'll see that there are some projects that bundle together developments, and there are other developments that are listed more than once. We split up the project because it was so large. The goal was, again, to invest the money as quickly as possible. So if there was an element like a roof replacement or some other piece of the project that could get done faster, we would award that, get it started, and then come back and do other major utility infrastructure and structure work. There are 15 major contracts that are complete, 14 that are more than 95% complete, and another 11 that have some more work to go. You can change the next slide. We're projecting only 5 of our largest projects will have physical work extended into 2023. And this is really, these are the big projects you've probably heard us talk about. Red Hook, Coney Island sites, and Baruch are 3 of them, some of the largest campuses that we're working on. This is also because of the introduction of what's new technology, new elements to Nycha's portfolio, like full backup power generators, flood protection, backwater valves that prevent sewage from backing into the building. And it takes pretty extensive interdepartmental coordination, bless you, third-party coordination and utility coordination to get these elements up and running. So that's been one of our challenges. Next slide. So this slide is indicating what types of issues have impacted projects across the portfolio. And this is, admittedly, most projects in the portfolio, and these are very large and complex projects, have had some kind of delay. And often there are multiple delays on a particular project. 2/3 of those causes are outside of Nycha's control. And so these are being tracked so that we can try to systematize the agency's response to those. If there's a particular partner or a partner agency or utility where we see patterns, we're able to work on them more systematically than just working on them on a project-by-project level. This slide talks about the prevalence of each cause across the program, but it doesn't show there's not a direct correlation between the cause and the number of days of delay or the cost impact to the program. So, for example, this shows that half of the projects indicated that COVID had some kind of impact to the project, but that only actually accounts for 4% of the days of delay. So it not a direct correlation. We have those analyses separately if you're interested. Next slide. Total construction change orders, and this is again specific construction, are about 5% of the original commitments. This is pretty standard and typical for a program of this size and complexity. And this also includes NYCHA-initiated change orders. So for example, like I said, because we already had a contractor and a construction manager at a particular development, there may have been efficiencies for NYCHA to add on a change order for work that was either in the planned capital plan, like gas risers at every building at Gravesend, where we are already touching every building at Gravesend, would make sense to do as a change order to this project. And also emergencies. If an emergency came up and a contractor was already mobilized for the Sandy project, it might make sense for that contractor to respond to the emergency, even if it wasn't related to construction. Next slide. And then very critically, Sean mentioned community outreach. That has been a huge part of the work that we do. Every phase of the work, during funding and procurement, during design, during construction, we've had to have an enormous amount of engagement. This slide really focuses on the three major types of engagement, the flyers, the calls, and the robocalls. It doesn't list some of the other really critical touch points, attending every TA meeting, having milestone meetings at critical construction points, the hotline, the email address, and having translators on staff so that we can address people's concerns right away when they contact us. So where does this come up? Well, this comes up because we might have to do a utility outage, do a crane lift. We have to impact people's lives to improve these buildings, and we are working on fully occupied buildings. It was of utmost importance to keep the projects going that we had this community outreach team. And then, this slide shows on the right side a sample flyer. This is the kind of asset we might produce to translate what billions of dollars of work actually means to beneficial use to the residents. So at this point, with $2.5 billion invested, 9,200 apartments have full backup power. We know that we have 100 buildings protected for this hurricane season. And so we're just trying to translate some of that big picture into what the impact is actually on people's lives. And I mentioned that the lessons learned have been looked at by other agencies. Last fall, we produced a number of reports to this end. The lessons learned from the Superstorm Sandy program, which is being used by agencies and organizations across the country as they think about resilience retrofit. And that fed into the climate adaptation plan, which is the forward-thinking work forward-thinking resilience work that needs to be thought about for the agency beyond just storm surge and Superstorm Sandy, thinking about the critical extreme heat, extreme rain, and other risks to the portfolio. And we're working with real estate and with comprehensive modernization to make sure that those programs are also incorporating that kind of thinking. Are there any questions?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Former person, Mr. Steve Lobis, he sent me imaging of, because I had asked him what's taking so long with Sandy. He sent me 3D imaging that was moving.
Okay.
Actually, you actually can see how the work is done, completed along with the written documentation, the projected time was spent. I said, wow, showed the walls catching the water, the secondary systems that's in place. And I emailed him back, I said, and I shared it with, some residents. So that was, it just put a moving picture from like I said, a cognitive issue that you can see. And to hear you say that you have a resource team that actually goes out and shows some concern and compassion to the residents to explain to them the anticipated inconveniences, delays, shows a lot of trust, saying, hey, they're telling us that our shoes might be untied, we might trip over this or something. You follow what I'm saying? That means a lot to people who struggle with the things they have to live with. So that was key to hear that this morning, and thank you.
Thank you for those comments. I mean, construction is impactful. We try to be upfront about that.
More images.
Chair.
If I'm reading the chart correctly, the flyers distributed in '21, 32,000, is that? 32,213, and each of the numbers represents the number of contacts.
The number, yes.
And, okay,
Contact
all right,
points.
all right, good.
And, a lot of this relates back to NYCHA's typical requirements before any kind of
Right,
disruption or outage.
Right, right. No, I'm just looking at that because these numbers cumulative are just for your Sandy program, just
Yes.
the past 3 years.
Yeah, past, I think it's since
19,
20.
20, 21,
16.
yeah.
And, I think they're speaking, Board Member Adams, you're right, imagery is very important. So when we put up posters, or vinyl posters on the developments, we try to use the renderings and some of that timeline information right up against the fence where someone might be looking and saying, what's going on here? I mean, that's when you think of it. When you get back home, you might not think to go Google it. So we want to make sure we bring the information to the residents.
Yeah, when it just catches people's attention. And then even if they're not sure what they're looking at, and someone has said, you know what, that's what they're doing with Sandy, now they can connect to it. And like I said, the key part from what I've heard from you this morning is the concern and compassion to actually have a team of people to go tell people what the hardships might be endured, maybe delays or whatever. That means a lot. Sometimes you get a report that just says everything is just going to fall into place, and that's not the case. But in this case, you actually said that, and that means a lot to someone like myself and others. And thank you.
I think that's great, and I, following along from Mr. Adams, whatever peer-to-peer learning can happen for the trust, and really actually bring the folks who've been out on the ground talking to residents, bring them into whoever's going to be doing the same thing for the trust project. I think all of those kinds of peer-to-peer projects could be very, very helpful.
No, we agree, and in a way, these are trial runs for the trust.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that some of the things that we've done already
Yeah.
would become like the book of standard practices for the trust.
Right. That's great.
Yeah.
I just had one question that got sparked, and I should have asked this probably of your previous colleague who spoke, but in terms of contractor performance, especially over the last several months, and this is maybe a question for you, for the chair, how much are we seeing the national supply chain issues impact our local situation?
So,
Bad question.
no, it's not a bad question because I'll let Sean and Sergio answer, but when I'm listening to them, all of a sudden there's an issue here with this piece of material. That lasts for a period of time and goes away, but something else pops up. So I think it's been, I'll describe it as episodic, but intense in some cases. If you guys want to embellish that, please feel free. So we have our chief procurement officer and our chief. So between the two, we'll get a good answer.
Has an overall better view, but just in the capital space, there was a lot of warning about it, and we didn't see it hitting early, but we've seen it very recently. So a couple of good examples are, elevators. We used to cost estimate 2 years ago is about $600,000 an elevator. When we started to anticipate supply chain issues, we put in more budget, and the reality ended up about double, 1.2 million, and today we're getting bids at 2 million. Right, so a lot of contractors, it's either because of the actual issues or they're pricing in the risk. And we're trying to get more savvy of how to manage that, especially as prices may come down in a year or two. And how do we manage that across existing contracts and new contracts? One thing we've learned is that, we have certain programs where we have a lot more internal expertise and relationships across the supply chain. So even where the end vendors, say we're struggling to get supplies, we can reach out back in the supply chain. A good example is the work we do in roofing, where we are now kind of stockpiling insulation material because we know that there's a 6-month lead time and it'll get longer in a way that we haven't done in the past. And because we have the supply chain relationships, we can do that at our scale.
Oh, thank you. The potential of vendors that are available and casting that net as wide as possible and not being so narrowly focused. Again, a little bit more of a dynamic approach in the way that government goes about sourcing. Sir?
Will there be more emphasis on the vendor's character, business patterns, things that, besides pricing, something that shows that they solidly can probably do this work with the proper staff? You know, all I hear sometimes, most of the time, is the pricing, but the characters of the actual people that do the work, how many people they have, you know, just the things, will there be more emphasis on those areas of the business that we're going to use to do the work?
It's responsibility is always a matter of what we're looking for in our vendor base to provide. And to the extent that we have commitments and availability, that's obviously a critical element to supporting us in our mission.
And Sergio, we have the D&B stuff coming or whatever that we're going to.
Dun & Bradstreet?
Yeah, that we're going to be looking at in terms of how we evaluate, or how they have evaluated these vendors for past work and things like that as well.
So thank you for bringing that up. I mean, Dun & Bradstreet is an industry practice as it relates not only in the public sector, but then also in particular in the private sector. And that evaluation that you speak to, Chair, is really amongst peers, so within the vendor community. So we're looking at how vendors treat each other, how they pay each other, and then how that translates as to what type of partner they are for us. Something the federal government used pretty extensively in the GSA. Thank you.
I just had one for Joy, if I could.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Number one, congratulations. You've done a great job and worked so hard on this. I think there's an opportunity for great communications to the residents who lived in these 35 developments. And that program-wide milestones chart, something to all the residents who lived through this. And so that they know sort of the outcomes of all the efforts that you've put in, as well as the results that it happened. So I just think it's an opportunity for communications by the end of the year when you're 90% complete.
Well, this year is, as you may remember, the 10th anniversary of Superstorm Sandy. That asset you're looking at now is on our website already, and we use it at our meetings, but we'll be doing some more extensive outreach to really give people that sense of pride, and we're working with the mayor's office to do a communication plan that helps really emphasize what a spear point Nycha has made in terms of what resilience looks like in New York City. So I'm pretty excited to work on that.
Yeah, and just that they survived it. I mean, they went through it with you, and so they're part of the accomplishments too. So I just think it's an opportunity. So thanks for your hard work.
Thank you, Joy. Well, moving right along to our 7 calendared items. Item number 1, Akisha Miller. Before you begin, I'm just going to ask all that we leave the microphone on green for the entire 7 items. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, Chief Operating Officer, board members, and colleagues. I'm Akisha Miller, Executive Vice President for Lease Housing, and I'm presenting item number 1, which is requesting authorization to amend the Authority Section 8 Admin Plan. Most recently amended by Board Resolution 20-7/29-53. In accordance with the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development Regulations at 24 CFR 982.54 D1, governing the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program to revise policies to be consistent with new HUD regulations and guidelines on fair housing, program admissions and eligibility, payment standards, housing quality standards, and other general program policies, and to address minor edits to provide better clarification of existing policies. Any questions?
Okay, there appears to be no questions. Thank
No.
you, Akisha.
Thank you.
Item 2, Carrie.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, Board members, Chief Operating Officer. I'm Carrie Jew, Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer. This morning, I'm presenting Board Resolution Number 2. With this resolution, I'm seeking authorization to ratify a contract capacity increase to an existing agreement with the New York City Office of Labor Relations, OLR, for the Employee Assistance Program, EAP. The initial contract with OLR for the Employee Assistance Program did not require board authorization and was subsequently amended for an initial 2-year term with 3 one-year renewal options. I am seeking to increase the not-to-exceed amount by $448,194.88 to fund the continued provision of services during the remainder of the 3 one-year renewal option terms, which started on February 1st, 2021, and is continuing through January 31st, 2024. OLR delivers comprehensive EAP services to help employees overcome personal problems that diminish quality of life and interfere with job functioning, provides trauma intervention services in the event of critical job-related incidents, assesses service needs, and directs employees and family members to affordable quality care covered by their health insurance, provides assessment and referral services, and provides management training and consultation. By way of background, OLR has provided approximately $3.2 million worth of services for the authority over the past 5 years. The approval to issue this contract capacity increase to this agreement prior to board approval was received by the Supply Management and Procurement Department from the Chief Procurement Officer on May 4th, 2022. The initial not-to-exceed amount was $457,030.14. The following funding contract capacity increases to the initial not-to-exceed amount, which did not require board authorization, have been authorized to date. $339,560.92 in May 2020, $63,232.40 in January 2021, $434,678.78 in April 2021. The new total not-to-exceed amount after board approval will be $1,742,657.12. Any questions? Yes, Board Member Adams.
So I've read your response in our previous conversation, and you stated that it would be very helpful to have them, this service, to give the employees a better opportunity to feel more comfortable. So my response overall is, why can't we just train people and give them the opportunity to work at the sites that have done the work side by side with the people? And if it's only going to be a referral service, they don't need a psychological or some type of special degree. Hire the people that have done the work to engage with the people that need help that they would feel comfortable with. Say a carpenter talks to a person who did carpentry, but now they are a specialist assigned to the sites. Say, you're having this problem. Why we just can't convert the resources and the money and hire in-house people to do that? If it's just a referral-based service.
So the referral piece of this service is only one part of the service. There are social workers and mental health professionals on staff at EAP who provide direct services. So that's one piece of it. Sometimes the referrals come in through a workplace-related incident that may be traumatic to some of the members of our staff who work at the site, and we want to bring a mental health professional on location so that it's easy to access in response to an incident. Sometimes employees will contact EAP directly through a hotline in order to speak to a mental health professional so that the person can determine what the appropriate referral or follow-up service might be for the employee or the employee's family member. And these interactions are confidential, so oftentimes an employee may not want to disclose to his or her colleagues that he or she is seeking any sort of service from EAP, whether it's, mental health related or otherwise for themselves or their family members, because they simply, don't want to disclose that kind of personal matter to colleagues. So they're able to do so anonymously, and then the EAP provider can either provide direct services or assist the employee in finding the services that they need. The other piece of EAP that we utilize is oftentimes in disciplinary proceedings where we find that the employee may need some additional expert coaching in anger management or substance abuse counseling or time management. As part of a settlement, we are able to direct the employee to receive EAP services as well.
Thank you. There are no further questions. Thank you, Carrie. Item 3, Oliver.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the board, Chief Operating Officer, colleagues. I'm Oliver Osterwind, Vice President for Project Management under the Capital Programs Division. This morning, I'm seeking authorization to reject all bids for a contract for roofing replacement and rooftop structure renovation at Baruch Houses Addition. Baruch Houses Addition, located in Manhattan, consists of one building with 197 apartments. As part of the New York City Mayor's Roofing Initiative, this contract under RFQ 228845-3 would have provided for roofing replacement and rooftop structure renovation at the one building. The scope of work included, but was not limited to, removal and replacement of the existing roofing system and related work, including asbestos and lead abatement. 7 bid proposals were received for this contract. The first lowest bidder, ABCD Corporate Construction Corp., submitted a bid in the amount of $1,567,343, which was nearly 40% above the authority's cost estimate, which Capital Projects Division deemed excessive for the value of the work being performed. The 7 bids received for this contract far exceeded the budget for this project, and therefore, CPD is requesting authorization to reject all bids, and this contract will be rebid. CPD is assessing the contract specifications to determine if any revisions are required to reflect current market conditions and rebid this project accordingly. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, there are no
Thank you.
questions. Thank you, Oliver. Item 4, Roseanne.
Good morning. I'm Roseanne Pizem, Deputy General Counsel in Nycha's Law Department, and I oversee the division that handles the FOIL requests that Nycha receives. I'm asking you to authorize the appointment of Adrian Jackson as Nycha's Records Access Officer under the New York Public Officers Law. Adrian comes to us with years of prior experience in this role, and in the short time that she's been here, she's already shown herself to be an asset to us, and I thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, there are no questions. Thank you, Roseanne. Item 5, Jason.
Good morning. Good morning, board members, Mr. Chief Operating Officer, Madam Secretary. I am Jason Goldberg, Chief of Corporate Affairs, and I am presenting this item on behalf of the General Counsel. Item 5 seeks to rescind a 1994 Board Resolution 94-1/12-34, along with a 2008 resolution amending it, which collectively addressed certain settlement authorizations that had been granted by the Board to the General Counsel. Pursuant to the 1994 Board Resolution, the Board delegated to the General Counsel or the General Counsel's designee certain authority to settle general and automobile liability claims against the authority in any amount up to and including the authority's self-insurance limit in effect at the time that such claims were settled, provided that the General Counsel periodically report to the Chair on all claims in excess of $50,000. Pursuant to the 2008 amending resolution 08-3/19-3, the board further delegated to the general counsel the ability to settle any claim for up to $3 million, provided that prior to exercising such authority, the general counsel receive the approval from a majority of the board in executive session to do so, should the settlement be between $1 and $3 million. The board further authorized the general counsel to delegate the settlement authority both internally and to outside counsel. Given that revised bylaws for the authority will be presented momentarily for approval, which contain updated settlement authorization for the general counsel, and with the hopeful adoption of same, the rescission of the 1994 and 2008 board resolutions are necessary. Lastly, with respect to the updated settlement authorization set forth within the proposed bylaws, the authority has always pursued and will continue to pursue appropriate actions to obtain the fullest possible coverage under its insurance policies. However, settlements of serious tort cases, as well as general or commercial litigation matters, are often accomplished on the eve of or during trial, and expediency of decision-making and action is required. As such, revision of the amount at which the general counsel may approve settlements improves Nycha's ability to resolve matters pre-litigation and pre-verdict. Accordingly, the Legal Affairs Department seeks the board's approval to rescind Board Resolution 94-1/12-34 and the 2008 resolution amending it 08-3/19-3. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Good afternoon, board members, secretary, and chief operating officer. I'm Eva Trimble, executive vice president for strategy and innovation, and I'm here to present authorization to request amended and restated bylaws. The bylaws were last amended and restated in April 2021 to align with the authority's transformation plan. The transformation plan sets out the strategic vision for Nycha's ongoing reform efforts. The proposed amended and restated bylaws make further revisions to the bylaws in furtherance of the implementation of the transformation plan, such as updating section 1.02 to align the appointment process of the chair with the terms of the January 2019 agreement entered into by and among HUD, Nycha, and the City of New York. Creating a new section 1.07 to govern the creation of a separate position of a chief executive officer with associated powers which will no longer be vested in the chair as they have been since 2014, in furtherance of the transformation plan and implementation plan. Associated edits to reflect this division of roles are being made to sections 1.03F, 1.05, 2.01, 2.03, 4.01, and 4.02. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on this item. Yes, Board Member Gonzalez?
So with this amended rules for the authority, so that will fit in very well with the trust. The problem is that we don't have all the candidates yet that are going to be filling in these positions.
Well, this would give us the option. This aligns the housing authority with how most housing authorities work.
Right.
So in a typical housing authority setting, the CEO is hired by the board. Now, we have the HUD agreement, which kind of supersedes us, but not always.
Right.
So when we did the transformation plan, we said, okay, let's go to this alignment. And basically what the board is doing today is preparing for down the road when this board would be looking at the CEO position as bringing someone in to manage that work. So this puts us in the spot where we need to be structurally to allow that to happen once we work our way through the HUD agreement process.
And then, of course, the new positions will have will be given the criteria as to.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And in typical, the board would form a small subcommittee. It could be ad hoc, or we could include it. Board members would be on it. some employees, and that's the search group. So whatever yours, now this can't fully impact us till the HUD agreement runs its course a bit, but now we're in position to exercise authority once the HUD agreement starts to mitigate. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Thanks.
Just to clarify the clarification. So this allows us to have the two positions. Yes. The
Yes.
process to fill them is dictated by the HUD agreement, but that aside, this really approves two positions.
Yes.
All righty. No other questions? Thank you, Eva.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 7. Lisa?
Madam Secretary?
Yes, Vice Chair.
I must abstain from the following resolution.
Duly.
Wait, are you sure?
Duly noted for the record.
Good morning, all. My name is Lisa Bova Hyatt. I am Nycha's General Counsel. I am here seeking authorization to appoint Victor Gonzalez as Vice Chair of the Board of the New York City Housing Authority, pursuant to Section 1.06 of the Authority's Bylaws, adopted by Board Resolution 58-6-515, with subsequent amendments, of which the most recent is by Board Resolution 22-6/15-6. The appointment shall be effective June 30th, 2022 through June 29th, 2023. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
I'm going to just attest to the gentleman's contributions and to the fact that he's just been a great board member to work with
Excellent.
in his position as vice chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay. Chair, 7 items were presented for board approval. May I have a motion to approve the 7 items with a notation that Vice Chair abstained from item 7?
So moved. Gavin?
Thank you. Seconded by?
Seconded, Wolf.
Seconded by?
Adams, second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? Thank you so much. Now, Chair, being that all matters before the board today have been addressed, may I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Chair. Seconded by? Thank you, Vice Chair. All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? Thank you so much. The recorded end time, excuse me, the recorded end time is 11:58. Thank you all. The next Nycha board meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, July 27th at 10 a.m. Continue to stay safe. Please immediately exit the room as I